Welcome, dear listeners, to a podcast that's about to transform the way you lead, the way you grow and thrive in your life and career. Get ready to embark on a journey filled with inspiration and self-discovery. This is Afsheen, the host of the Getting Real podcast. And this season, I'm delighted to be joined by none other than my co-host, Vicki Davitashivili. Vicki?
Are you ready to embrace the joy of leadership, the power of self-discovery, and the limitless potential of your career, and ultimately your entire life? Join us on this incredible journey of transformation.
Yep, stay tuned because the best is yet to come. So hi everyone, Afsheen and Vicky here again, and this time our topic is completion versus competition. And so Vicki and I are going to be diving into a couple of aspects of this topic, completion versus competition. The first one is, how do I as a leader hold the topic of completion versus competition within me? And then how do I help my team? And how do I role model for my team my commitment to this idea of completion versus competition? And finally, we're going to be talking about how do you strike the right balance between completion versus competition? Because so far in the world, competition has been a very big part of career progression. And we're not really about swinging the pendulum entirely in the opposite direction. So we explore ways to find the right balance between both. And I'm going to stop here because I'd love for Vicki to share what she's discovered are some key hard facts and stats about this topic. So Vicki, over to you.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Afsheen. So according to research that was conducted by the Sloan School of Business at MIT, what they've uncovered is that after interviewing over 150 companies, they found that the companies where they found that there is internal competition, it is harder to manage than those companies that are competing from the outside world. And there are hard numbers that are decked against this type of inner behavior and inner fighting and inner turmoil when you have it at the corporation. So here are some stats. One is that the companies with that inner fighting, inner competition saw a 32% lower revenue growth and 53% lower stock price growth over a 5-year period. So when we talk about culture, when we talk about the way that we choose to work together internally, it has real consequences to our revenue, to our top line, bottom line, and the value that we create for our stockholders.
So true, Vicki, and such sobering statistics. So let's dive into our conversation. Completion versus competition. And I know that this subject is very close to your heart. So I'm super interested and curious to know, what is the first thought that comes to your mind that you really want to share on this topic of completion versus competition? I'm so curious.
So it's an interesting topic that you would think was inspired by my personal life, but it's actually been inspired by something that I've been observing at work lately. And the reason that this is coming up for me is because the higher up you go in the organization, the fewer opportunities you have to go up and up, another step in the ladder. And so that can very easily create a scarcity mindset. As in, if I want to get promoted, there are only 2 positions to which I could get promoted. Therefore, I don't only have to be as good as everyone else, I have to be exponentially better than everybody else. And when we get into that mindset, we get into a very me, self-preservation mode, rather than thinking about, well, how do I do an amazing job? But how do I do that by through the amplification of partnering with my colleagues, through the amplification of what they might have to add to what I'm looking to accomplish and achieve. And it's not about being the best. It's about how can we all create value and outcomes that are of the greatest good for all. So what I realized is that in life, when you complete one another, it is a completely different dynamic and outcome versus when you compete with one another and you're able to accomplish a fraction of what you would have otherwise. I'll pause here, Afsheen. I'll turn it over to you and give me some of your thoughts on your observations around this phenomena of completion versus competition and how you've seen that play out.
Yeah, I'm going to grab two of the words that you said that really kind of rang a bell inside me. The first one was accomplish, what it is that we want to try to accomplish. And the second one was value, the value that we want to create. And I think that there is that maybe is a common denominator. Everybody wants to accomplish something and feel like they've accomplished something. And everybody wants to feel like they created value. And until that level, right, we're all the same. That's when the denominator is the same. And I think what I'm hearing is that it is in how we define for ourselves what accomplishment looks like that we differ, right? So for some of us, when we're accomplishing something, we're doing it on our own, right? It's us singularly accomplishing something. If we're creating value, we're doing it on our own. It's us singularly doing it over and above anybody else, right? And what I think you're saying is that what you and I completely agree with you. I love this idea that actually, what if we started looking at accomplishment and value creation as a collective endeavor and stopped looking at it as an individualistic endeavor, right? And that, you're right, it would take an enormous amount of coming from a place of abundance rather than from a place of scarcity, right? Because it requires me to believe that there is enough for all of us to accomplish together and enough for all of us to create value with together, rather than there isn't. So rather than the opposite. So I guess that's what was coming up for me is how do we hold and how do we define accomplishment for ourselves? And then the second thought that came for me after that was, when I work with organizations, especially with teams, the work that we do in team coaching is around systemic team coaching, right? So we are not looking at just you as an individual. It's the me, the us, and the it, right? So what is it that I do where I have a gift or what it is that I can contribute? How does that create ripples in the us, and how does that come together as we collectively work together? And then how do we enhance that us, strengthen that us, hold that us, master that us, not just the me, but that us, to create a systemic impact in the it. And the it could be anything. It could be the organization. It could be the people. It could be the world outside the organization. So I think I love your thinking, because for me, it has a real systemic thinking behind it rather than just a very individualistic impact. So that's my thinking. What comes up for you as I share that?
No, that's very true. And I read this very interesting study by MIT Sloan School of Business, and they did some research around inner competition. We think about competition so many times from the lens of companies competing against one another to win market share, right? But there is a systemic, just like you said, there's a systemic competition that happens, especially the more senior up you go, because again, you have fewer and fewer positions that people could step into. And yet, interestingly enough, data shows that 80% of employees cite that they would feel much happier and more engaged at work if there were more of a community at work. Which doesn't surprise me at all, right? Because when you have a community, these are people that you relate to, these are people you want to work with, you want to partner with. And if you even think about, so many companies are now forcing employees to go back into the office. Why? Because they want more of that interactivity, and they want more of that we versus of that me, the individualistic way of working that we're now starting to get used to as part of the hybrid culture, right? Like when you're at home, you're basically in your own bubble, working on your own, versus when you're in the office, you just naturally sit down, you collaborate, you start to spur ideas, right? And I think that it's taking that notion and translating that into your business planning, goal setting, how you operate, how you choose to bring everybody in, right? Breaking down the silos, not organizationally, but breaking down the silos in how we think and operate and act together. And, you know, I was thinking about it. Okay, so let's pretend I'm the CEO of the company. What can I do? What can I do to create that culture? And I do believe that this culture of completion versus competition does start at the very top, right? And so what can we as senior leaders do? Well, there are certainly, we can create common goals because we recognize, as for example, I can't deliver on anything without technology, as an example. So should technology and I have similar goals or the same goal that we're both working towards? Well, then my partner and I, we certainly can't deliver on that goal without each other and probably 3 or 4 other teams in the organization. So there's one, right? How do you create a culture of camaraderie? Well, I think that there are certainly things like that you can do to get people together, to get to know each other on a more personal level, right? To see each other not as a threat, but more as a friend, right? As a friend, not as a foe, not somebody who's going to come in and take over your area, and create that culture of the we, create the common goals, frameworks where we're delivering together as one team rather than multiple teams. So I'll stop there because I'd love to get your thoughts around, like, what are the practical tools and applications do we have in our arsenal as leaders to create the culture? Because I do believe it's a culture where you remove the fear and you remove the scarcity mindset, and you create that land of opportunity at work where you have ample opportunity to collaborate and to come up with lots and lots of creative new ways of working together. Afsheen, what's coming up for you?
One of the things that are coming up in my mind is Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. So, and if you haven't read the book, and this is for our listeners, then highly recommend reading the book. It kind of lines up with what you're saying about having collective goals. So, you know, in order for teams to work effectively together without competing with one another, their attention needs to be towards a common set of results. And there are 5 key steps in order to help teams get over their lack of attention to those common results in order for them to break through the silos that may exist right now, may break through the me-ism. Me, my function, my results, my success, all of that. So there are 5 key steps to break through the me-ism and the silo-ism and get to a collective attention to the same results. So a really big recommendation to read through the Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. They have a great assessment tool that will help you even identify where in the system of those 5 steps there might be a gap that you will need to fill as a leader in order for your team to come together and really focus on the collective results. So highly recommend that. And then the second part that came up for me, and you and I were discussing this earlier, was there's a being aspect of this, and this all, like, this is something I hold very dearly, isn't before we actually start using the tools of, let's say, the Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team or whatever else comes up, is, who do you need to become as a leader? What mindset do you need to have as a leader in order for you to begin to role model this, and in order for you to hold this completion versus competition approach, not just for yourself, but for also the others that you lead who will be coming through the organization and creating thereafter a culture in the organization. So it has to begin somewhere, as you said. If we were being competitive versus complete, in a more completion place where we all collaborate together, imagine how limiting that would be to innovation and creativity. So if there is one, and there's usually 3 to 5 key organization aspirations that every organization wants to achieve in a year, right? If any of those have to do with innovation and creativity, you've already got a hook to hang your argument on in terms of why you need to focus on a completion approach versus a competitive approach. Because in a competitive approach, you are not going to get enough inclusive, collective thinking and idea generation that will give you access to creative and innovative ideas. So find that 1 or 2 organization priorities, those 1 or 2 organization priorities, which will be served best by having this approach, and anchor your argument in that. That's what I would suggest to any leader who's learning to flex their muscles in this space, is look just around you.
No, I think that absolutely makes sense. And I love the framework, and, let's include the link to the book in there, because it is a very famous and very practical way to operate as an organization. And in fact, I think a lot of companies have adopted that framework, where we do have kind of like the 2 or 3 strategic priorities, and then your sub goals all roll up to those big 3 objectives for the organization. Absolutely. The one thing that does come up for me too, I can just hear some of a listener going, wait, but there is room for competition. And in some instances, competition is good, right? And so I don't want to lose sight of that either, right? Competition is something around, being very self-driven and motivated. And I don't think we're saying to never be competitive, to not be competitive with your inner self. I mean, I'll give you an example. I started running 5 or 7 years ago. And when I started running, my personal best was running 2 or 3 miles. As I continued to practice, I started to compete with my own self, and I started to say to myself, well, is that my ceiling? And then I said, well, maybe my ceiling is 7 miles. So I started to compete with my own self, and I got up to 7 miles. Then I said, wait, is 7 my best? And I started to compete with myself, and I got up to running a half marathon. So I think that there is room and space for, competing with your own self, and to never place limitations on yourself, and to only believe that the only way that you can achieve things is through, collaboration. Because I couldn't run, with my children, the half marathon. I had to do that on my own. So there is space for that. But it is the energy with which you head into, these competitive circumstances, right? And it is the intent and the intention that you put behind when you are trying to achieve or accomplish something or create value. This goes back to the first two words that you dove into, which was accomplishing and value. I think that there is room for where you want to do something and you want to strive for it on your own, and you absolutely have to work on it on your own. But I think what we're trying to shine a light on is that that when you are in a team setting, and even though you are a leader who leads their own area of the organization, recognize that you will achieve and you will create a lot more value and, truthfully, more happiness, more engagement, more community for you and your teams when you are working from the energy of completion, when we partner together, we create more, better, faster, in a more innovative way than if I were to do it alone in a silo by myself. So that was just a nuance that I wanted to add.
I really love that, and I think that's a really good call out. And I'm going to add to that I think balance is super important. I think if we swing one way versus the other, we tend to lose out the benefits of the one way. And then there are really important places where we need to maintain our competitive edge, and there are still. But I think the challenge is more in that has been more of the focus. And so what we're trying to do here is get people to say, okay, let's embrace a wider reality, right? That encompasses both of these possibilities. So I did some research and I did some thinking around that. There's a great article by the Harvard Business Review. It's called The Rule of Co-opetition. Okay. So which is really like, where do you compete and where do you cooperate? And how do you do both of those at the same time effectively? And so they share a really great example that's not just based on leaders, but of course it's leaders who are making these decisions. But they relate to them as organizational decisions that are being made with this great balance. So as an example, GM and Ford, two completely different companies that were operating and competing in the same market in, let's say, 2013, 2014. And despite the fact that they were competitors and real rivals, they found a little place in the universe where they could actually cooperate. And it was on their transmission technology. Apparently, they were able to actually come together to share transmission technology for their cars. And in doing so, were able to free up time for their engineers to do next level technology research for their individual, car markets, let's say. And at the same time, they had an opportunity that followed where they could have also cooperated, or, for example, run towards the completion for a diesel engine technology, and they chose not to. So there are real opportunities as an organization and also as an individual leader, or an individual leader who's driving organization priorities and approaches towards completion versus competition, to really look at where is the right balance between completing, cooperating, and between competing, and so that you're able to get, and I think this is really the bottom line, to achieve what's best and the greater good for your organization and for the communities that you operate in. Which is what we're all trying to do in the end, aren't we?
So well said, Afsheen. I love that. And I love you bringing in that example, because I think this is a phenomenal example of two organizations that you would consider as being enemies, right? Who decided to become frenemies for the greater good, to put it in teenage terms, who have decided to have to put some of their differences aside and to really push forward a very innovative technology for the greater good. And I think that this is what it's all about, just as you said. So thank you. Thank you for adding in that lens.
Stay tuned because the best is yet to come.